right, it is 2:22. We can go ahead and get started. My name is Maurice Echols. I'm an attorney advisor for the Office of Government Ethics. I'll be your moderator this evening. Welcome to Blowing the Whistle in the District. We're glad you're here to listen with us or learn with us. Again, this is Ethics Weeks 2023. Everyday ethics, hashtag can't go a day without it. And so hopefully we'll learn at the end of this session a little bit more about blowing the whistle, and that it probably is much more than just a catchy song that we may have heard on the radio years ago. So we've got three panelists that will be giving us this discussion today. We have Siri Nelson. She's an executive director at the National Whistleblower Center. She's an attorney barred in New York and DC and teaches whistleblower law at Northeastern University. She loves spending time outside and fighting for justice. Also, we have Matt Wilcoxson with us. He is the Deputy Inspector General for External Affairs with the DC Office of the Inspector General. He has been with DC OIG in various positions for the last 8 years, and outside of his government oversight interests, he is an avid traveler, with Antarctica being the only continent left to visit. And then also we have the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability's General Counsel, Rashee, who also happens to have one of the cooler names in DC government. She's been working as an agency counsel for about 7 years, 3.5 of those with BEGA, and she has one dog and one son, both with pals of curly black hair. All right, so that is the introduction this evening, this afternoon, excuse me. And I'll pass the mic off to Miss Siri Nelson. I think you're still on mute.
Thank you so much. And I don't see the slides changing. I'm wondering if I'm having like a tech issue, but so I'm really happy to be here today. I think Ethics Week is like the coolest idea ever. So when I was invited for this panel, I was just over the moon to participate. NWC is based in Washington, D.C. We have been advocating for whistleblower rights since 1988. We're a national focused organization, so we look a lot at the federal whistleblower laws and how to change the culture around whistleblowing nationwide and globally. So the work that we do, we hope that it touches Washington, D.C. as much as possible. So we do some consulting with local agencies, of course, are open to answering questions for organizations that are based in DC, companies. We do a lot of work with the State Department when people come to visit Washington, DC, dignitaries from around the world. They organize anti-fraud trainings with NWC to help people around the world understand the value of whistleblowing. So we have a strong presence in DC in that sense. We work a lot on policy and advocacy. So we're looking at federal bills and legislation. And again, when we get questions from people in DC, we love to participate in getting better whistleblower protections for DC residents, especially city employees and people who work at contractors that work with the federal government but aren't necessarily government employees. So some of the federal work we do touches DC residents very closely because so many of you are federal employees, and the protections that you're granted and the processes that you have to go through when you make a whistleblower complaint are impacted by the work we do, particularly to do with the Merit Systems Protection Board, which we've engaged with closely at first to get quorum, which we were very aggressive about last year, and there was quorum, but now they're working through a backlog of cases. And now I'm looking at the current nominees for MSPB members so that they can continue to work through their cases. NWC celebrates National Whistleblower Day every year. For 2 years, we did it virtually, so it was a global event. We aired it on YouTube, but before then and going forward, unless there's another pandemic that stops us from doing so, we will be celebrating in person. So we've had celebrations on Capitol Hill where we have senators speaking about the value of whistleblowing. And this year we had a celebration on Capitol Hill where I'm very proud to say a DC whistleblower was able to take the stage and talk about his experience blowing the whistle in DC. A teacher named Marlon Ray, who was raising concerns about the educational objectives set for predominantly Black neighborhoods that seem to be punitive and not necessarily educationally focused, and suffered retaliation for speaking up. He was able to obtain a proclamation from the DC mayor recognizing July 30th as National Whistleblower Day, and then presented that proclamation to us at National Whistleblower Day at our celebration. So that was a really great way for us to interact locally, and a super proud moment for NWC to really be recognized by DC as a city and help us with our goal of raising awareness around whistleblowing. So one of the biggest objectives that we have at NWC is to help the general public understand the value of whistleblowing and how that's a critical part of maintaining democracy, economic fairness, and anything that has to do with ethics. Because it's one thing to set rules, it's another thing to be able to enforce them. And so what we've seen statistically is that programs that have whistleblower provisions in them, like anonymity, anti-retaliation, and rewards, are the ones that actually generate better information about ethics violations, fraud, and other crime. Because when the researchers look at the ways in which crime is detected, about 80%, and this is globally across the board, doesn't really matter what kind of crime or violation you're talking about 80% of those are a result of some sort of whistleblower tip. So law enforcement is really only good at reliably catching about 20% of the violations. So in order to make sure that that 80% of good tips come forward and that enforcement actions are able to happen, whistleblowers are pretty much the key to it. And so we see that there are some really consistent tenets behind an effective whistleblower program that we statistically have seen support more whistleblowers to come forward and also dissuade wrongdoers from engaging in their actions. So when people know that there's a large possibility that the people who witness their wrongdoing will speak up, they're a little bit more hesitant to take action and engage in this wrongdoing, whether that be retaliation or fraud or even just workplace bullying. So anonymity, anti-retaliation, and rewards work together. To my knowledge, anonymity and anti-retaliation are pretty well understood tenets. So anonymity is the ability to report anonymously without revealing your identity so that you are less likely to be subjected to retaliation, because people can't retaliate against you if they don't know you've spoken up. This is a major component of safety and making sure that people are able to be vigilant about ethics violations and still maintain the security of being able to go to work every day. So, you know, there is a culture of expecting people to talk to their supervisors directly when they have concerns, but this is a very scary thing to do. And it's also something that is very likely to give rise to retaliation because they know who you are and they know exactly what your concerns are. So the anonymous pathway is something that NWC highly encourages, and as I understand, is something that is available to DC employees and also in different areas of reporting in DC, and which you'll hear more about later. Anti-retaliation, similarly, is another step to increase safety for whistleblowers. So when you have anti-retaliation provisions, it's basically a rule that says that if you're a supervisor, manager, an employer, and you find out that someone reported a violation of law, rule, or regulation to the appropriate authority, like the HR department or an external agency that's responsible, like the IG, for investigating wrongdoing, and you treat them poorly because of what they did, like you restrict their hours, you don't give them the promotion that they're entitled to, you start excluding them from meetings, somebody who otherwise had a great performance record now all of a sudden is poorly performing, then you that's retaliation and it's prohibited. So there are consequences for that, which you'll also hear more about today. But finally, one of the things that is more contentious, almost everyone agrees about anonymity and anti-retaliation, but something that's a little more contentious is the rewards. And that's something that we don't really see widely proliferated, especially on a local level. But I just want to put a pin in the concept of rewards and how important it is to incentivize people to come forward, but also to send the message that whistleblowing is valuable. And when you look at how we can reward whistleblowers, even panels like this are a reward for whistleblowers. They show whistleblowers that they are impactful. They show whistleblowers that it's an important activity to do. And they show whistleblowers that there are resources that are being dedicated to supporting that kind of engagement. So when we talk about rewards, a lot of times they're financial. They're great when they're financial, but it's important to look at it more broadly, especially when you're looking at what you can do. So when we think about the everyday steps that we can take to help whistleblowers, one of them is to be positive about whistleblowing and do things like express appreciation when somebody raises concerns about possible violations rather than immediately shutting down and trying to discourage them from speaking more. Recognizing the value of whistleblowers and whistleblowing in general, talking about how they've contributed to the success of your industry, the success of our country. At National Whistleblower Day, we always bring up the original whistleblowers from 1778 who spoke up about the abuse of British soldiers in order to protect the integrity of our democracy. And they were rewarded for that by the Constitutional Congress back then. Looking at workplace bullying and the way that it's related to whistleblower retaliation, sometimes you don't know why someone's being bullied at work, but a lot of times the bullying has to do with some sort of discomfort with how they're challenging management or the status quo, and oftentimes that involves concerns about ethics. And then, finally, if you want to go a step beyond culture and everyday supports, it's making sure that you are aware that there are whistleblower attorneys, and that if you are considering blowing the whistle, it's really important that you find one. At NWC, we have an intake form that you can use to try and obtain an attorney. What we do is a third party evaluates your intake form, and then we'll send it to an attorney if we have one in our network that would take the kind of case that you might have. However, especially for local matters, I encourage you to look online and see if you can find someone more locally based who understands the BC programs, unless you have a federal concern about something going on national level. So that is National Whistleblower Center and our values and why we're so excited that this conversation is happening.
Good. That was great information. I just had a quick question, just from your, I guess, experience or the data that you've seen. How many whistleblower, tips come in anonymous versus revealing, their identity? Like, do you have any data on that?
I don't have the numbers in front of me now, but anecdotally, I will guess that 98% of the tips are anonymous when they can be. People are not that eager to put their identities out there because a lot of times the fear is that it's not going to lead to anything good for them. But what we see in public discourse are the people who have revealed their identities. So there's an idea of being a whistleblower that's very different than the real lived experience of being a whistleblower. So many of the most impactful whistleblowers, we will never know their names. We will never know the tips that they brought forward, but we are beneficiaries of the impacts that their whistleblowing made. So at the Securities and Exchange Commission program, the majority of the whistleblowers are anonymous, yet they are able to help the agency recover billions of dollars in order to help maintain our economic stability globally. So it's a really interesting question that you ask there.
Thank you for that answer. All right. Does anybody else in the chat have any questions we can ask me for Miss Siri? Whoops, Siri responded to me. I bet you get that a lot. No questions for Ms. Nelson? My chat sometimes moves slow. Going twice, so we'll start. We should go to the next slide, Rashee.
Right, I think it's me now. Once again, Matt Wilcoxson from the DC OIG. And given the construct that Siri's given us about what a whistleblower is and kind of the rights and remedies that are available, I kind of want to hit on what exactly our office does in the whistleblower realm. And so if we can go on the next fast forward. Off the break, so what does the Office of the Inspector General for the District of Columbia do? So we independently conduct audits, inspections, and investigations, all in the vein of trying to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And if there's misconduct, we're trying to go after the corruption, mismanagement, fraud, waste, and abuse in the district government programs and operations. How we do our work from an auditor inspection standpoint, you'll see our public reports on our website. You'll see our plans for the upcoming fiscal year in terms of the areas we want to focus in on from a proactive approach. And then on the end of it, if there's some misconduct that's resulted in some sort of outcome, you'll see a press release or some sort of notification to folks about what we did, what we found, and what the ultimate outcome was. Go on to the next slide. I think it's helpful to bifurcate what exactly an audit, inspection, and evaluation is versus an investigation. Oftentimes they'll be used interchangeably. And so from the audit, inspection, evaluation standpoint, we're looking at programs and operations of the district. So we're looking at how resources are used, how those resources are being converted into some sort of output, and from the effectiveness standpoint, how are those outputs resulting in some sort of outcome. And so at the end of the day, those are what those particular pieces in our portfolio aim to address. On the other side, we have our investigations piece. So we're looking at corruption, mismanagement, waste, fraud, and abuse. And it can go from a spectrum of folks who are just not doing a very good job or may not necessarily be very good at their job, all the way to, no joke, they're violating some sort of federal or district statute, and they're somehow benefiting from that monetarily. You'll see there, as it relates to corruption, generally speaking, that's bribery, gratuities, contract steering, the like. Fraud. So if someone fraudulently fills out a form seeking to obtain some sort of district benefits that they're not entitled to, that's something we'll also look at. And those are the types of things, both corruption and fraud, that are adjudicated really in the judicial system. So we work with the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring cases to their attention. And should they decide that there's a probable cause to move forward, they'll go forth and prosecute on our behalf. And we'll work in tandem with them as they go through that whole process. If we go on to the next slide. As it relates to district employees and their responsibilities on the district's Whistleblower Protection Act. So each employee of the district government is required to make protective disclosures concerning any violation of law, rule, regulation, contract, misuse of resources as soon as they become aware. Additionally, a supervisor who becomes aware of similar issues is also required to report those violations or possible violations. And so the OIG, just like BEGA, just like Counsel, just like the executive, basically there's a well-defined tranche of individuals that you can bring these complaints to. They'll take action as appropriate. And in addition, in the district's personnel manual, there's a requirement for employees to immediately and directly report credible violations of the code of conduct to both BEGA or our office, the OIG, or both. And we work very, very well with BEGA to deconflict any types of matters that are brought simultaneously to our attention. We go on to the next slide. So as it relates to the OIG and the district's whistleblower statute and complaints. So we're defined as a public body in the whistleblower statute, so you can bring matters to our attention. Additionally, we're prohibited from disclosing the identity of any person who brings a complaint or provides information to us. without the consent of that person unless that disclosure is unavoidable or necessary to further an ends of investigation. Generally speaking, if we're prosecuting a case, folks need to be aware of who's brought this matter to our attention, and that's coordinated without any surprises on anyone's part. In addition, if you believe that someone's taking action against you based on either bringing a complaint to our attention or providing us information, there's a carve out for that as well in terms of protecting you from that reprisal. And so if we go on to the next slide, as it relates to the district's whistleblower statute, what happens if you think that you're aggrieved by either bringing information to our attention, BEGA's attention, and something bad has happened as a result? So there are really two avenues that you can explore. One is to pursue civil action through DC Superior Court, or you can file an appeal with the Office of Employee Appeals. And that's the conduit to address any sort of retaliation that you may believe you experience. And then going on to the next slide, we often get asked, well, I brought some of the OIG's attention, what happened, right? And so we've got a couple different conduits that you can bring stuff to our attention. They're listed there on the left-hand side of the slide. But it's important to pay attention to the complaint analysis piece. We spend a lot of time looking at stuff that's brought to our attention and figuring out what best to do with it. And there's really 4 different avenues that we can explore once something is brought to our attention. The first one is we just have to dismiss it. There's inadequate information for us to figure out what's going on, and there's no way for us to get back to the individual to get any sort of clarifying information. If there is an avenue better suited for the issue that you brought to our attention, we'll normally assist that complainant. Fortunate or unfortunate, if you type in to Google Office of the Inspector General, DC, our office comes up first. And so a lot of times there are folks that have an issue with the federal program and want to bring something to a federal OIG's attention. So we'll help folks better navigate that to find the best avenue for them to explore. If there's a matter that involves the district agency, it's not necessarily rising to the level of some sort of misconduct, but they need to be made aware of it. We'll put the agency on notice saying, hey, this brought to our attention and we want you to take action deemed as appropriate and let us know what you did. And then ultimately, if it's a matter within our jurisdiction that we have equities in, we're going to transfer it to one of our units. And so our audit and inspection groups will look at the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness piece through their work. But there's the investigation piece. So if there's alleged misconduct of some sort, we'll take it for action. And so at the bottom of that bottom on the right-hand side, you'll see not only are we looking at district employees, programs, and operations, we also operate a Medicaid fraud control unit for the district. So the district's almost 300,000 Medicaid beneficiaries, billions of dollars that go out in the Medicaid program. We also have equities in looking at that from a provider fraud standpoint, as well as abuse, neglect, and exploitation of Medicaid beneficiaries, or that sort of conduct that's happening in Medicaid funded facilities. So there's a lot to cover, a lot that goes into the ultimate decision of what we do with the information that you bring to our attention. And then on the next slide, just reiterating how you can get a hold of us. And these slides will be available, I believe, after the conference as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Bad news doesn't get better with age. So we're here to help as best we can. So with that, I'll turn it over to my illustrious colleague, Rashee, who can talk to the other side of district oversight.
All right, thank you. Carol, let me unmute you and you can, I think you are unmuted. Carol, can you hear us? I feel like we're on a seance now. Carol, are you in the room? Okay, oh, she typed it in the chat. Okay. Can Matt differentiate when something should be sent to an ombudsman versus the IG?
I know there are a couple of different ombuds that exist within the district government. I'd say
Carol works at OCP, if that helps.
I'd say you can always bring it to our attention, and if it's something that's better fit with one of the ombuds that exist in the district, we'll be happy to either redirect you towards that or share that with the ombuds through a referral to them.
Okay, and I see Gabby has a really good question in the chat, and I'll get through my presentation, then we can all answer Gabby's question at the end. Thank you for that, Gabby. And so, like Maurice said, my name is Rashee Raj. I'm with the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability, and everyone can hear me all right, right? Just making sure. Okay, good. I'm general counsel here. I've been here about 3.5 years, and just will quickly tell you about who we are, what is it we cover, and what is it we really do here. I know some of you have been avid Ethics Week attenders, have been to more than one session, so I don't want to belabor the point about what we do, but just for the folks who haven't heard it yet, we'll go through a little bit of it. So the board was created by the Ethics Act, which you'll find in DC Code 1-1161. Our jurisdiction extends to all district government employees, not to include the courts. Those aren't DC government employees necessarily. Our structure is a 5-member board, and underneath that board, we have 2 main offices. We have the Office of Government Ethics and the Office of Open Government. And tomorrow you will learn everything you would ever want to know about the Office of Open Government. They have a full day of sessions with Ethics Week tomorrow. So you will learn about Open Meetings Act, Freedom of Information Act, transparency in government, and how to use the meeting calendar, all of this type of stuff. So that's a lot of what the Office of Open Government covers. Office of Government Ethics, you may know us from trainings and all that other type of stuff. I work on the OGE side, so as we go through, I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do. So some of the ethics standards that guide district government employees, you know, they are kind of all over the place. And if you were in this morning's session, you may have heard Asia Stewart-Mitchell talk about our upcoming legislation, the Comprehensive Code of Conduct, which would be kind of our way to consolidate some of this into one place. But of the different places we're looking, we have different conflicts of interest provisions under the Ethics Act. Under the District Personnel Manual, under Chapter 18, you'll find the Code of Conduct. We also have the financial disclosure statement filings that we deal with, local Hatch Act, and next year you'll see probably monthly local Hatch Act trainings because it'll be an election year and it'll be time for that again, and different federal criminal statutes as they relate to conflicts of interest, salary supplementation, other things, some of the things that Matt had talked about during his presentation. Now, what is it that the Office of Government Ethics is doing? We do ethics from cradle to grave. And by that, I mean, we start with training. You may have even got the training at new employee orientation on your very, very first day in DC government. And unfortunately, that's a day when they throw a whole lot at you. So it maybe isn't the best time to receive ethics training because you're also trying to pick out life insurance and health insurance and dental insurance and all of the different things and figure out where to get your ID badge. But we do training, and we continue to do training all year. We offer a monthly training every single month. We can do specific trainings for agencies as well. If there's a particular need that you have that's catered to a certain area of ethics rules, we can do that. Like, let's say you feel like you have an issue with gifts in your agency, we can create a training that's just for that. We give advice. This is confidential advice, so you can reach out to us, and the advice that we provide you is confidential to you unless you share that with other people. We do investigations into ethics matters, into the complaints that we receive. We do some enforcement of some of these investigations if they result in findings. And we also handle regulations of lobbying and the FDS programs. So you've probably had some contact here or there with our agency in one way or another. Now, violations of the code of conduct could result in a couple different types of sanctions and penalties. And I want to make it clear that we don't have the authority to take personnel action. So if somebody's getting fired over something, that's not something that our agency is able to do. We're an independent agency. We're only able to do civil fines and penalties, so censures, admonitions, remediations, maybe a probationary period. But for the most part, what you'll see are fines. Fines up to $5,000 per violation is what you'll mainly see. Now talking about obligation to report, I know Matt mentioned this a little bit, but you do have an affirmative obligation to report to BEGA and or to the Inspector General credible violations of the Code of Conduct. And this is part of Chapter 18 of the DPM. Failure to do so itself is a violation. And I say that with the caveat too of like, we're not using this as a, failure to report it is a violation. Now we're going after everybody for it. There are a lot of different ways to make reports to us. You can do them confidentially. Actually, it's always going to be confidential. There's extremely limited circumstances in which anyone would find out the identity of the complainant. And generally, it's not going to be through us because that's it. Through our statute, the identity of the complainant is to remain confidential. You can make these complaints anonymously. And I know Siri had talked earlier about the power of anonymity and how important that is. So you can make these complaints as well. So that way, if somebody comes back to you and says, oh, you failed to report this, it's itself a violation, you could say, no, I did report. I reported anonymously some time back. And even if you report anonymously, you will get some kind of confirmation showing that you did report. So then you would have a number, some way to know that you did report it. So there is some way that there would be some notification that you did do what you said you had done. Cooperation is mandatory in investigations. So that is, part of the obligation. And retaliation in itself is a separate ethics violation. So if you make an ethics complaint, and you find that you have been retaliated against, that itself can be another ethics violation. And that, and we can get into that a little more with the whole group, but that retaliation is specific for making the ethics complaint. So how do you make a complaint? So there are a number of different ways, and I tried to put as many of them as I could think of here. And one is the hotline, which you can call. I don't know if we're all big phone users anymore, but probably the best way is via our email, bega@dc.gov. We have a main line if you want to speak to somebody in the office. You could come up here if you needed to. There's somebody here, business hours, 5 days a week. We are at the Marion Berry building for about a month longer. We'll be here still, and then we're moving to new office space, but we will still be available to you. You can go to our website at bega.dc.gov. It's a new website, and it's much more user-friendly than the previous one. So if you go, you will, I think you will find a much better user experience. So there's a direct link for the site where you can make a complaint, and that is bega.dc.gov and then /page/file-complaint. Now, you don't have to remember that, because when you go on our website, one of the main tiles will be about enforcement and making a complaint. So from there are 2 different ways that you can do it. There's an online form where you can type in all of the relevant information for the complaint and submit that way. Or there's a PDF that you could use. You could either print, or you can use in Adobe and fill out and return that to us via email or, I don't know, snail mail, another method, however you'd like to get that back to us. There are a couple different ways to do it. And with that, I think we are open to questions.
But yeah, did you all want to circle to Gabby's question? She had asked, how often do you see whistleblower complaints that are ultimately personnel matters? For example, disgruntled employees files complaints about their new supervisor because they don't like their leadership staff. So how do you go about determining, if something was, I guess, a frivolous or personal complaint rather than an actual complaint? Any insight on that issue?
Yeah, I think probably Matt and I both have some insight into this issue. I was thinking, is it okay if I go back to your slide, Matt, that had the chart on it?
Yeah.
I think that is, I think that's a really helpful here. And that my thought is that here in the complaint analysis part is kind of where our agency is also trying to determine, is this an ethics complaint or is it something else? And in that analysis, if we find that it's something else and not an ethics complaint, that's where we end up having to dismiss a complaint. But sometimes it's not readily apparent right off the bat, so it does require some investigation to get there. So sometimes it requires some investigation to find out that there is not an ethics complaint. But if it's readily apparent, then I think it is a dismissal of the complaint itself, and then a referral maybe, depending on the type of complaint. And then Matt, do you
You hit the nail on the head, Rashee. It's just a matter of, what someone's telling us, and then if there's nothing, within our oversight ambit that we can deal with, it may be a matter that's best suited for management and not necessarily the individual who's being alleged to be abusive or, disruptive to the organization. But everyone has a boss. So if it's right and proper, we'll technically refer to, an agency director or anyone higher above that, just to put them on notice and say, hey, folks are bringing this to our attention. And this could, it needs to be brought to your attention as well.
I also want to add that there's not always a clear distinction between the two. So a person who has concerns about a violation and reports them and also doesn't like their boss is still reporting a valid concern about a violation of a rule. And so a lot of times in the whistleblower perception, there is this idea that there has to be a perfect relationship between the employee and their employer, and that the report is made on a strictly objective basis. That's just very rare to be a reality in life in general. There are people who don't report because they like their boss. So it's important to distinguish between analyzing the facts being presented by the whistleblower and considering the context within which the whistleblower is presenting those facts.
I was just going to chime in, even though I'm not official part of the panel. But yeah,
please do.
You get complaints, and we basically analyze them all at face value. And so, if something is just a frivolous complaint, you can tell there's some emotion behind the complaint, and when you get into the facts, it doesn't necessarily, point to a violation, of the code of conduct. We can tell right away, and those cases are dismissed. We don't like to, get into, the emotions of the matter, because like Ms. Siri Nelson said, this could be, an actual complaint that leads to an actual violation. And so there's no way to really, there's a way to stop it, but, there's no real way to sort of address the, the inner office class of personalities. Just, as a, individual that's working within the government, just do your best to stay in line with, the code of conducts and the various laws. And, if you do it, if you conduct work that way, if a complaint is filed against you, it'll get dismissed because we see that you're doing things the correct way and within an ethical mindset. All right. And then now we have another question. I wanted to ask earlier how the monetary amount of fraud is determined. My former colleague at the House represented the plaintiff in the recent Booz Allen DOJ matter, and it seemed relatively easy to determine the money amount allegedly overcharged. But how is this determined in other situations that are not easy to pinpoint a dollar figure? I'm unfamiliar with that case, but are you all familiar with it? I'm thinking waste, but I'm not sure.
I don't know all of the details of that case, but I'm familiar with DOJ determinations as to whether or not they want to pursue an investigation, and the dollar amount is usually in the millions. In terms of how to determine the dollar amount, so the dollar amount doesn't just pertain to the amount of money that was defrauded. It's also the potential recoveries by the government in violations and sanctions and penalties. So it's not an easy determination to make on its face, but depending on the information the whistleblower has, usually the documents can establish a pretty clear dollar amount. I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess the best way to answer it is that you determine the dollar amount with evidence, and the better evidence you have, the more likely the government is to take action.
Chat moves pretty fast. All right. So although BEGA is not involved in personnel actions, this is to you, Rashee, are violations of the code of conduct still grounds for adverse personnel actions by management?
I think they can be, but they are, that would be, I think that would be the management of the agency using them in their Douglas factors for the personnel action, if that makes sense. I've not been thinking about it. I've not had like a request for any of our investigative files to do a personnel action or anything like that. And sometimes, like if there's a negotiated disposition, I think an agency may use that to move forward on a personnel action. But I think that they could use it for that, but I'm not sure that we would have any. I'm not sure that we would necessarily have knowledge into it or know that that's.
Yeah, we wouldn't necessarily have knowledge into it. We don't necessarily weigh into it, but violations of the district personnel manual, they're all grounds for some type of redress. So it just depends on the management in that aspect. One of the code of conduct provisions is nepotism. And within that code, it mandates that, a person hired in violation of nepotism be separated from the employee. So, other than that, BEGA doesn't necessarily have any interplay in the personnel actions.
Yeah, good point. Good remembering on that. I think normally when I find out about it, I find out about it anecdotally and after the fact. That something like that's happened.
All right, another one, Rashee, could you differentiate the requirements for a formal complaint that will be presented to BEGA's board and just a tip where it is discretionary whether the tip is presented to BEGA's board?
Now let me go back to, let's see, the different types of complaints. Now, any complaint that comes through would or could be opened as a preliminary investigation, which would be investigated by the Office of Government Ethics. Now, for a complaint to go to the board, it's within our statute. There are a couple different ways. One would be as a referral from the Office of Inspector General with a finding on it. So let's say Matt's office has made a finding, and then they send a case over, then that would be a formal case. So I think a couple examples would be, I think recently a couple of cases ended with plea agreements, and we used those press releases to close some formal cases that we had open of like this person was sentenced to prison time. That being said, prison time will probably, cover what needs to have happened on the civil side as far as an ethics complaint. So we'll use, the press release from OIG or from DOJ, whoever the prosecuting agency is, to close out a matter like that. The other way for a case to become a formal case is for it to be a sworn complaint, notarized. Off the top of my head, those are the two that I can think of, but it's within our statute, it's delineated a little bit further.
Piggyback off that question, what if a case is already in the newspaper? That's how we receive the report, because some investigator or reporter, or is alleging it, in a paper.
Yeah, that can be a formal case as well. And a lot of those are extremely newsworthy too, right? Of things that are in the paper. I mean, it's not confidential anymore. So that could be a formal case as well. Some of those might actually not necessarily go to the board too. They may just be a preliminary investigation too.
Next question. How, I guess this is OIG and BEGA, how do you work with employees who have access to confidential information that are key to a whistleblower case? Does the employee have to provide confidential information, or can they just tell you about those documents and let OIG access them through their authority?
I'll take a stab first. So with us, the OIG, we've got pretty broad access to all district government records, files, and the like. If that doesn't work, we also have subpoena authority, both for documents and testimony. And I'd say to an individual that has concerns about themselves sharing confidential information, or what they believe to be confidential information with our office, be more than welcome to just flag that for us and, give us that breadcrumb that we could follow on our end through our processes to get access to that information if there's ever a concern about whether or not they should be sharing that or not. But
I think same too. If we can get subpoena authority from our board, should we need it, and we also have access to records, and especially if an employee feels like uncomfortable about it too, because that's another ethics complaint in itself, right? Like if you're giving away government confidential information, is your agency going to try and say that you were doing this, and that's going to create more issues, especially like if you're seeking a whistleblower attorney and going that route. If you don't want to be the one to get confidential information and turn it over, I mean, I don't think that turning over confidential information to OIG or to OGE, constitutes it leaving the government. But if that is a concern, if you want to say like all of the records are located in this area, then that that helps too, or this is the date range of emails, or that type of thing.
And that was all the questions that I see. Let's see here. Just off the top of my head, here's another question. What happens if a matter is brought to, OIG or BEGA, and the office determines that it's not in the jurisdiction? But I believe you touched on it already.
Yeah, and so if we get a complaint, doesn't fall within our jurisdiction. It may be something related to an entity outside of the district government. We'll do our best to try and steer the individual towards that appropriate avenue of redress. And if there's an opportunity for us to, take that information, share it with a counterpart, we'll do that as well. But at the front end, we're trying to make sure that folks are landing in the right spot to get whatever concerns they have addressed.
Yeah, exactly the same. We make referrals to all different types of agencies, and if it's one that we can't make a referral on, we can refer the complainant on as well. Like sometimes we'll receive something that looks like more like an EEO type complaint that maybe needs to go through OHR or through the EEO counseling process. And so if there's a named complainant, we can let them know that, you may want to try EEO counseling or another method, or if we get something that maybe isn't necessarily ethics, but it's clearly waste, fraud, and abuse, of course, we're going to send that to OIG. So referring as much as we can.
I had another question too, Siri. You probably chime in on this one. When it comes to whistleblowing, I don't necessarily think of just filing a complaint against an individual. Is whistleblowing mostly individual cases, or is that more so there's a group of individuals or an agency-wide corruption issue, or what's distinguished between a whistleblowing case and a regular complaint?
So on the federal level, the distinguishment is made around how it's filed. So if there's a concern about a general agency and you're a whistleblower about that general agency, then you file a whistleblower complaint. But on the higher level, it's less likely to be about an individual unless you're going through some specific economic fraud related complaint. So for the IRS program, it might be about an individual. For money laundering, it might be about an individual. When it comes to violations of anti-discrimination protections, might be about an individual. With bribery, it might be. But usually the cases are about a way broader scope of conduct. So it's about a big problem in a company that a lot of people are involved in and a lot of money is involved in, or a big problem in the government that a lot of people are involved in and there's a lot of taxpayer dollars involved. So both are equally whistleblowers. It just depends on, I think one thing to distinguish is that if a person is actually in the government and is reporting about a big problem that they're responsible for evaluating anyway, then they wouldn't be considered a whistleblower unless it was specifically about like something in their own agency that's of concern.
And then just one more question from me. I'm hogging all the questions. Is whistleblowing, is that always like a monetary issue, or what other issues fall under like, a whistleblower complaint? Can it be discrimination? Can it be, just some other type of issue or widespread issue, or is it always, fraud, embezzlement, or waste? Like, what, you have any insight on that?
Well, for the DC local laws, it seems like there's a lot of conduct that can be covered that isn't necessarily monetary, like violations of the codes of conduct and different sorts of prohibited personnel conduct. And that's also within the US government. The Office of Special Counsel monitors those types of violations regarding fraud, waste, abuse, and that can include abuse of authority and prohibited personnel practices, which are retaliation, but other things like discrimination and failure to uphold certain requirements for employees. Similarly, in the private sector, violations that relate to discrimination practices and hostile workplaces, they can give rise to economic sanctions. And, you can be a whistleblower regarding those activities, especially when the behavior is so widespread that it could result in large economic sanctions. But you can also report to through OSHA about certain types of misconduct that are more individual based. However, it won't become a huge whistleblower case if it's just between two people. But sometimes, ironically, these cases can lead to larger issues within that organization. A lot of times when we see violations like discriminatory behavior, sexual harassment, office, workplace bullying. There are oftentimes other sorts of violations like fraud, bribery, disregard for regulations, failure to report accurately, just a general culture of dishonesty that can be, the surface can be scratched when you have a whistleblower that comes forward. One notable whistleblower is Kimberly Young McClear. She was a Coast Guard whistleblower, and she is based in DC. She blew the whistle about a lot of the discriminatory practices there, but that also gave rise to a really large scale evaluation of how the government operates and the types of conduct that is happening at the Coast Guard in general. And she's really made a lot of impacts based on her experience to help people who work in that agency.
Didn't see any other questions in the chat come through. Going once, going twice. Did you like what you hear?
Thank you, Carol, for sending that article.
Right. I don't see any more questions on my end. I think you all were pretty thorough, and everyone here is fully educated.
Well, I just want to throw in that National Whistleblower Center has a website, www.whistleblowers.org. We have tons of FAQs at our website. You can follow us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. And, you know, we have an office in DC, so you can email us at info@whistleblowers.org if you have any follow-up questions or are interested in learning more about NWC.
And hopefully Siri's going to be at our happy hour on Friday.
Oh, yes, I will.
So yeah, you want to come out and talk more, come to happy hour on Friday. It's on the Ethics Week agenda. This is not just happy hour that we just made up right now. It's on there.
All right, we got a bunch of thank yous rolling in now, so I guess it's safe to end here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Have a good rest of the evening. And we'll see you tomorrow. I think this is the last one today, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.